Well, women in South Africa continue to be raped, tortured and killed at an alarming rate. While some categories of crime against women have gone down, there has been a significant rise in the murders of women and children, the President admitting that. This summit aiming to reflect on the work done since 2018. So let's look at what has been done. A Ministerial Task Team was set up in 2019 and the National Strategic Plan on GBVF was adopted in 2020. But that is a plan. Some laws have been changed, such as the Domestic Violence Act, to make it easier for victims to get protection orders. The establishment of a Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Council has dragged, the President admitting that as well. But the bill is now before Parliament. Well, the news around GBV is overwhelming, but let's quickly remember some of the victims. Just in the last few months, 8 women were gang raped in Krugersdorp. The suspects have now been freed. In the Eastern Cape in September, 15-year-old Zenizole Vena was gang raped. When she went to the clinic, she was told to start at the police station and then come back to the clinic. She died waiting at the police station. Soul City has been working on the National Strategic Plan. We're joined by Pontsho Pilane, Communications Manager at Soul City, as well as Onica Makwakwa, Wise4Afrika Director. Let me start with you, Ms. Makwakwa. Some crimes are underreported, but the dead bodies don't lie. So the President confirming that 52% rise in the murder of women. It's nearly the same for the murder of children. We are losing this fight, aren't we?
Absolutely. We certainly are. It's actually quite frustrating. But also we've known this, right? I think for me, the difficult thing is why are we waiting until this moment of a convening in order to reckon with the fact that women have continued to die in higher numbers, domestic violence continues to increase, and sexual offenses are continuing to increase, while also met with a response from the state that has been quite lackluster. You know, it's quite interesting that you mentioned protection orders and the changes in the GBV law. Just today, the Kliptown police station did not have ink in order to print a protection order. And so that's the reality on the ground. And, I'm just really struggling even with myself as to why we should even need a convening like what's happening today and tomorrow in order to understand that things are just not working.
I'm also struggling to understand why the President is saying more funds should be allocated. I mean, this has been ostensibly, staying with you, Ms. Makwakwa, it has been ostensibly a priority for years and years now.
Yes, I mean, there's been consistent lack of political willpower to actually implement anything in terms of, changing the course that we are in. The National Strategic Plan, in fact, for us to even have had the National Strategic Plan, it was predominantly the action of civil society through total shutdown and the presidential summit driven by civil society again to get us to that point. And so it just seems to feel like this government will not move until civil society actually moves, right? But the irony of that is that a lot of the women in civil society, there's men as well, but a lot of the women are actually working in civil society with no resources, sometimes no salaries. So we have a strategic plan that talks about economic power and shifting the economic independence of women, while we also rely on women providing free labor in order to solve a problem that we say is a pandemic and a national crisis. So, I'm just not, convinced that we needed even the speech that the President gave today. I'll be just very honest that it's everything we've had before. We don't need this kind of convening for him to make these commitments. He's made them before, but he has also failed to hold his people accountable. There is absolutely no consequence management in this government to make sure that people stick to what they've said that they will do. So for the most part, I feel like we are once again as women on our own. And I'm sitting here asking myself, why do we even need the state? They failed to fund the GBV agenda on the National Strategic Plan. The 1.6 billion that he talked about, he himself admitted that it was not a fund specifically for GBV. It was departments being asked to slice the top of their budgets and ring fence an amount for GBV. But let's just even interrogate that. One of the things that was supposed to happen with that 1.6 billion rands for GBV, the ERA plan, was to build a DNA lab in the Eastern Cape. By the way, this was 2019-2020, and we are sitting in 2022, and that lab still has not been built. A site has not been identified. There's no procurement progress in that sense. And we saw with the Manjobeni event that the DNA had to go to Cape Town.
So,
right?
so the Western Cape, Ms. Makwakwa, I'm just going to stop you there because this is something that we will pick up, by the way, later in the show. It's extremely important, and the Western Cape has been dealing with a huge backlog from the Eastern Cape. So it was crucial that be built. That apparently is still on the cards. Let me get a view from Ms. Pilane. Are you feeling a little bit more confident? What has changed in your view over the last few years? Are there any changes on the table that we can cling to with hope?
Thank you, Francis. Let us remember first that it is the president who called the summit, right? And as civil society actors, as Ms. Makwakwa has spoken, we were very reluctant to even come to the table. However, we're engaging in the process of the summit as a way of accountability, as ensuring accountability. And the National Strategic Plan on GBVF is a 10-year roadmap. And although as civil society, we thought it would be too premature to evaluate this, but as Ms. Makwakwa has alluded to or has said, the fact that there has been so little political will, leadership, and ability to move forward with the low-hanging fruits of ensuring the National Strategic Plan is in place and the commitments that are made are actually seen. What we've been seeing, particularly from a civil society point of view, is that us as civil society, we are able to measure what we have done. We are able to say what the interventions that we've put in place. We're able to assess and evaluate what has worked and what hasn't. And this summit is for us to collaboratively do that with the presidency. The theme is accountability, amplification, and acceleration. First, before we even start about what has worked or what is working, we need to ask ourselves if at a high level, do we have high level commitment? And in the past 2 years since the National Strategic Plan was adopted, have we seen a commitment beyond just rhetoric? Have we seen action? Are we seeing, as you were saying, the National Council on GBVF, which was first tabled last year in September, then miraculously disappeared and now resurfaces weeks before the summit. We look at the year one report on the progress to the NSP on GBVF. We see that there are activities that have been done, but our question is, what are the monitoring and evaluation steps that are taking to look at the 6 pillars of the NSP and ask ourselves collectively and individually in our sectors, is this working? If it's working, how do we know it's working? How do we amplify it? Are we actually trying? But more than anything else, it is the government as the custodians of putting things in action, as the people who've been elected, who have the power to ensure that the National Strategic Plan is fully implemented. And we are hoping that the summit, as right now at the summit, we're in our different clinics where we're discussing and action caucuses where everyone is discussing that it is not just the talk shop for speeches and panels, but we actually are able to come up with a roadmap to ensure that the National Strategic Plan is implemented. It is not the first of its kind, but we owe it to ourselves, particularly as civil society, to see that this NSP is fully implemented.
Yeah. All right, well, Ms. Makwakwa, coming back to you, let's make it practical. I'm still struggling to understand if anything has changed. And Ms. Pilane spoke about low-hanging fruit. Let's talk about some of the things that are practical. We know some domestic violence happens at home. So what can the state control? One of them is the houses, the safe houses. And the Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Maite Nkwana Mashabane, said that there has been an increase in the number of safe houses. Do we have any way to really assess that? Do we have the numbers? She also said that the capacity of police to deal with crimes has been developed further. I'd like you to assess those two comments.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think on the comment of increase in safe houses, I think this is also where civil society has really played a great role. I mean, we saw this firsthand during lockdown, where they were not even allowed to operate those shelters, but civil society found ways to be able to move forward. There's been a slow progress in terms of, I think you will recall that the Minister of Public Works had made a commitment that there were buildings that were owned by government that were not necessarily in use that could be made available for civil society to operate for shelters. We have not seen as, I think that's an area that could use amplification and acceleration because there's been really slow movement in that particular area. But I think, you know, when we come to just overall how government is doing, it's really scattered. You know, I think I really appreciate Pilane saying that we are here to actually look at also how we account as civil society in terms of how we've been acting here, but also we need to be holding government accountable for the promise that they've made. Low-hanging fruit, as you say. I mean, those were just really easy things to get to make sure that women have access to shelters. But, you know, alongside this shelter argument, we have to talk about the fact that we have a plan that relies on a woman who is abused and her children to vacate their home to a safe house while the perpetrator remains comfortably at home. Yet we've built prisons that we seem quite reluctant to use as the shelters for the violent one in the family. And that's the kind of change that I really want to see for, personally, is fundamentally changing this around. If we say that South Africa, we want a brand South Africa that is about a country that is safe for everyone, then we need to implement the laws that we have in place and make sure that the men who are found guilty of abuse are actually arrested and they actually serve their time, so that we don't need to build more safe houses. We've already built a lot of prisons. Let them occupy the prisons so that women and children can remain home and be safe. I think, you know, we need to really work towards prevention as well.
All right, we haven't even spoke about the poverty and the unemployment, the things that keep women trapped financially because they are often so dependent on men just for their survival. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We'll have to leave it there, but we'll certainly follow. If anything further, if anything practical does emerge from the second summit. That was Pontsho Pilane, spokesperson for Seoul City, and Onica Makwakwa, Wise4Afrika Director.